March marks the beginning of Women's History Month, and for those of you who do know my channel and who understand how I see these things, I am against not only Women's History Month, but all of its intellectual cousins such as Black History Month, Pride Month, Indigenous Peoples Month, simply because I don't believe a society that deifies identity is particularly healthy or insightful. In fact, that society is being weighed down by mediocre thoughts and beliefs, and it's impacting their actions and quality of life. Having said that, I began to think recently about the current state of our world. And I asked myself, I said, Christian, if you were an apologist for Women's History Month, and you were looking at the current state, cultural state of women, how they have been perceived and treated over the past few years, how could you justify the continued existence of your month? Because Women's History Month is entirely about celebrating, supposedly, the accomplishments and the achievements of women throughout history, especially here in America. But it becomes especially puzzling to me that we are celebrating anything relating to do with that when over the past few years, womanhood has been under attack from the cultural vanguard that is typically on the left, and the entire idea of what it actually means to be a woman has been undermined by this same vanguard in the name of acceptance, in the name of benevolence, in the name of advancing forth progress, in the name of so-called equity. Not old equity, which actually meant something, but modern day equity, which is quite simply the appropriation of resources from one group at the expense of another. So my contention is that Women's History Month in our modern society, where the idea and the existences of women are not even respected by a lot of our institutions, is absurd. And it has absolutely no meaning in what I would call this post-woman world. Before I elaborate, allow me to say one thing. Many of you may look at my appearance and you may begin cringing within your mind and saying, why is this evident man talking about women and women's issues? This video is especially for you, because if you genuinely believe that universal problems that affect all of humanity, that may have a relationship with sex or gender, but are not obviously bound by sex and gender, can't be elaborated upon by another human being, then I would submit to you that your mind is shackled by mediocre ideas, and you should spend more time thinking and less time being outraged. In addition to that, I think that that mentality is actually a product of the foundations of the post-woman world that I wish to talk to you about today in this video. In my perspective, there are several ways that women and the concept of womanhood in general have been attacked and undermined in our post-woman world. There's been an intellectual way of doing this, there's been a social way of doing this, and there's also been a political way of doing this. In order for this to be more relatable to all of you, I will begin with the social and explain how the social and cultural treatment of women has related to certain intellectual ideas about what a woman actually is. Socially, we have seen over the past few years transgender men, that is, or rather transgender men who say they are women, going into women's spaces and in the name of acceptance and benevolence, marching into them, competing in sports competitions, competing in all kind of other things, and completely and utterly running up the scoreboard, winning across the board. The most egregious case of this aberration of decency has to most certainly be the case of Leah Thomas, the so-called transgender woman who's actually still a 6'4" biologically infused man who, according to members of the swim team that he competed on, still has his full intact male genitalia. And Thomas managed to go into the women's swimming team and compete and even beat a lot of the women that had trained years and years and years to get a chance at winning the swimming competition. The most notable of these women is the activist now, the former athlete turned activist Riley Gaines, who had firsthand experience with Leah Thomas. Indeed, she remarked that Leah Thomas would sometimes walk throughout the changing room where the women's sports team, members of the sports team, would intimately change and they would get naked and he would walk out, look at them, and he would have a fully erect member. I'm not trying to be grotesque here. I'm trying to simply tell the truth. And this bothered the women in that locker room, but they were afraid to speak out. Because if they were to speak out against this flagrant rebellion against decency, they would be called transphobic. Isn't it odd? When someone seeks to assure an environment in which self-preservation is the standard, they are supposedly taking away from the lives of others. This is the ideology of power dynamics and conflict relationships that so many people who have created this hostile atmosphere towards women have created. It is a result of what they believe, that society is not as was conceived by the natural law theorists of the 18th century, or by the folks that laid the groundwork for America, or by anyone with any sense. Society is not about mutually cooperating with people within a context of duty and obligation that go beyond your own personal whims and adhere to broader moral principles, but it is instead a big game of power and conflict, and made the most strongest, or maybe made the most oppressed in this case, win by help of equity. That's the Leah Thomas situation. And this is not just Leah Thomas. This has happened several times where women are forced into silence, where they are subjugated beneath the censorious boot of institutions when they try to speak up against their own annihilation. Even within movements that supposedly are pro-woman, this censorious sentiment has flourished. Indeed, within feminism, which I could talk about feminism all day. There's many things about feminism, both good and bad. But what I've noticed is that even within feminism, women who proclaim that being a woman is an objective fact of reality, they are called trans-exclusionary radical feminists. So women that affirm that in order to be a feminist, you have to presuppose the idea of a woman, are called bad because they're excluding people who simply identify as women from their calculations and their advocacy. That doesn't follow from the premises. That is an irrational sentiment. But under the frameworks that have been built to destroy women and the concept of women, this is completely rational. Or rather, not rational, because reason is oppressive to these people. This is rather, in their way, this is proper. Because it simply shows how these social categories can expand and their benefits. There are many more examples of this as well. So in the feminist movement, which was supposed to preserve womanhood in society against certain attacks from maybe traditions or whatever, that's been compromised. Sports competitions built upon merit, that's been compromised. All these things have been compromised and suppressed under this post-woman narrative. And indeed, feminism is very interesting because in feminism, first wave feminism presupposed the actual existence of women. Second wave feminism began to presuppose different ideas. Women were there, but women only existed in relation to their ability to be in conflict with patriarchy. This is what the personal and political means. So women, from the first wave to the second wave, went from being people advocating for their own existences to having their own existences framed totally and utterly in terms of conflict, in terms of antagonism against the man, which then if you take that idea of conflict and antagonism and you extrapolate it outwards and you take it to a logical conclusion, everything, even meaning, is within tension and conflict and antagonism within itself. And this is the intellectual attack that came and that built the foundation for this post-woman world. Judith Butler is the one in her book Gender Troubles, that foul theorist of the mind who actually has created a lot of the groundwork for this trans hysteria. It was Judith Butler that said that being a woman is simply a social category, that there is no biological correspondence to what it actually means to be a woman. In fact, Judith Butler admitted this very idea in an interview with The Guardian where she said that we need to rethink the category of woman. And that the idea of a woman is not something that happens at birth, but is instead imposed upon us by society. So if the very essence of who you are is birthed in conflict, then you, if you're going to follow this logic, must also be someone who's always constantly in conflict. This is the intellectual assault that has led to the post-woman world and has led to such absurd questions like what is a woman, and led to a Supreme Court nominee, a Supreme Court Justice nominee, someone supposed to be on a court where they consider matters of law and philosophy, saying that she cannot say that what a woman is because she's not a biologist, and then the scientific community coming out and saying that's correct. The term woman is opaque. It all goes back to the idea of woman being a category of social construction that has no relationship to concrete physical reality. The true intellectual culprit at the bottom of this phenomenon is the notion that not only does society impose things upon us, and society creates meaning, which is a foul notion in and of itself, it's true enough that society does impose things upon people, and that society has certain norms that shape our thinking, but it does not follow that because they have those norms that that all meaning and all objective understanding must necessarily fall within the bounds of what society thought. If this was the case, human beings never progress, because progression and throughout human history has simply been a case of human beings reevaluating their assumptions, looking towards the natural world and looking towards the world around them for answers, and then with their understandings and insights, using their creative potential to create more and to do more within the constraint of moral limitations. That's what it's been for a very long time. And of course, there's been some messiness along the way, but still. But it goes from that framework to being society dominates your mind. And so in order to take back what society took from you, you have to subjectively believe and think whatever you want about the world. And that includes believing and thinking whatever you want about your identity, which then includes rejecting the concrete objective fact of womanhood. When J.K. Rowling says these are not our crimes, when she looks at a transgender person masquerading as a woman doing something evil, she's not trying to be hateful. She's trying to call back to that ancient and really self-evident idea that womanhood is an actual physical thing with actual physical properties that cannot simply be defined on the social level, but has to be defined on the physical level and the essential level that is bound up in the soul. But that's ignored because there is no conversation about the soul these days or about physical reality these days. It's all about power, conflict, and society, not about meaning, substance, and sound thinking. We ought to do that. Meaning, substance, sound thinking versus power, conflict, and society. One of those leads to a world where man is constantly in enmity with one another, where he can't think straight because he can't even define the terms in which he is thinking, and he is just in a perpetual state of chaos. And the other leads to a world where we can actually reason, progress, move forward, and deal with things as they are, not how you want them to be. How can any defender of so-called Women's History Month be celebratory in this moment when the very notion of womanhood is under sheer assault from so many forces? The truth is, if they're being intellectually honest, they can't. The truth is, if they're being intellectually honest, they will admit that the curse of gender ideology and the notion that subjective preferences overrule what is seen and demonstrated in reality empirically are the two main culprits and two main enemies to the preservation of womanhood and all meaning in our society. Until we can recognize that, and until we can analyze the relationship that gender ideology and subjectivism have to the human heart and how they manage to remain with such force in our culture, such perseverance in our culture, not because they're right, but because the heart subdues the mind, and the mind being subdued to the heart can't actually put up a defense. We have to analyze that relationship and deal with it, or we'll all be slaves to passion. When I see someone who's transgender, I'm compassionate. I don't dislike transgender people. In fact, I think that anyone that has the courage to say, you know what, I believe this is how I am and I want to live that way, is someone that is probably on the right track. But here's the problem. The moment you take an aesthetic preference and you try to impose it upon society, you've gone from simply trying to live your life to trying to make everyone else conform to your version of your life, which is not only unnecessary, it is fundamentally antisocial, and it violates the conscience of people around you. And if my conscience can't work, I can't be a moral agent. So what you are really asking me to do is sacrifice my morality for your taste, and I can't do that. I'll never do that, nor should anyone be forced to do that. But when it comes to the children, oh my gosh, because the idea that the children just want to be who they are and they need to just be expressive and all that kind of stuff, fine, let them be expressive, but not in a manner that permanently alters who they are as people through surgeries and through cosmetic alterations, but instead in a manner that simply allows them to express their emotions in a non-permanent way. Expression is not meant to be a permanent thing. It's meant to be transitory. It's meant to be dynamic. It's meant to actually be able to ebb and flow of time. But what this does is it tries to assign your very meaning as a human being and your ability to express yourself to your physical identity. This is the folly of gender ideology, trying to basically define us by how we look, trying to define us by our aesthetics, while ignoring what is greater, that I am an individual with the soul, with the mind. That is the problem here. And that's what transgenderism as an ideology on the social level, not as a subjective preference on the individual level, has let happen to society. It has confused taste with substance. It has confused goodwill with forced lip service, intolerance. It has confused so many different things, so much so that it has simply put a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of nice, decent people. We have to ask ourselves something. In this post-woman world, what is there to celebrate? I don't celebrate. I weep. I weep because it's not just women who are the victims. I weep because it's not simply a matter of radical activists trying to change things temporarily. I weep because the more I survey my generation, I'm Gen Z, the more I survey my generation, I begin to see the language in terms of subjectivism and radical deconstruction and anti-foundationalism, all which go towards this broader idea of the post-woman world, all which create this post-woman world, become accepted in everyday life. And as more generations continue to accept this nonsense, unfortunately, the less stable our world will be, because meaning will become illusory and feelings will become the dominant currency of our future times. But we can stop this by recognizing that being a conservative is not about being stuffy, not about being resistant to change. Being a conservative is about being attuned to foundational meaning and how that interacts with the world and how that should interact with your life so that you can live the best life that you possibly can live. That's what I advocate for. The post-woman world can be reversed when all of us remember that true meaning exists, but we need to look beyond ourselves and look beyond society to find it. And when we do that, perhaps, maybe, just maybe, we'll be on a better track than we are right now. But until then, in the post-woman world, there is no Women's History Month, and there is nothing to celebrate. My friends, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. If you enjoy politics, social commentary with a hint of philosophy, please consider subscribing to my channel. I really would appreciate it. It would do me a lot of good. Also, be sure to like the video. Be sure to donate to me if you want to on my PayPal, Patreon. All that is in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.